I don't remember the exact moment I stopped checking the door that night. I only remember realizing later that I hadn't done it, and how strange that felt once everything was over. I was 39, living alone in a small rental house after my divorce. The house wasn't new, but it was quiet, tucked into a neighborhood where nothing ever really happened. I'd been there almost 2 years, long enough to feel safe, long enough to stop being careful. That night started late. I got home just after 10, later than usual, tired in a way that made my thoughts feel slow and heavy. I locked the front door automatically, dropped my purse on the kitchen counter, and turned on the light over the sink. I didn't turn on anything else. I never liked bright lights late at night. They made the house feel exposed, like it was announcing itself to the dark outside. I reheated leftovers, ate standing up, and scrolled through my phone. The TV stayed off. I liked the quiet. It made me feel like the day was finally finished. When I was done eating, I rinsed the plate and turned off the kitchen light. Normally, that was when I walked to the front door and checked the lock again. I always did that. It was a habit I'd picked up, living alone. That night, I didn't. I went straight to the living room, sat down on the couch, and picked my phone back up. I didn't notice the difference right away. The house felt the same as it always did. Still, familiar, safe. I told myself I was just tired, that routines didn't matter as much as I thought they did. Around 11, I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was just a car passing on the main road a few blocks away. The sound was distant, stretched thin by the quiet. I waited for it to fade, but it didn't. Instead, it slowed, then stopped. I sat still, listening. Nothing else followed. No footsteps. No voices. I told myself it was nothing and went back to my phone. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. I get spam texts like anyone else. When I opened it, there was only one line. "Did you forget something?" I frowned at the screen. I hadn't been expecting a message from anyone. I typed back, asking who it was, then immediately felt foolish for engaging at all. The reply came quickly. "You didn't check." My stomach tightened. Not fear yet, just confusion. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, someone guessing, someone trying to mess with a random number. I typed that they had the wrong person. There was a pause, long enough for my heart to start beating faster. "No, I don't." I locked my phone and stood up, suddenly aware of the space around me. The house felt quieter than before, like it was holding its breath. I walked to the front door and checked the lock. It was locked. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me feel uneasy. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the handle, trying to remember if I'd turned it myself when I came in, or if I was just assuming I had. My phone buzzed again. "You usually check twice." I felt a chill move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I hadn't told anyone my habits. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't made enough noise for someone outside to hear me. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but the feeling that settled in my chest didn't listen to reason. I went into the bedroom and closed the door quietly, locking it behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in my hands, trying to think clearly. I typed that they needed to stop contacting me. "I just wanted to make sure," the reply said. "Make sure of what?" I typed back, before I could stop myself. There was another pause. "That you were alone." I felt my throat tighten. I didn't respond. I turned the bedroom light off, leaving only the faint glow from the hallway creeping in under the door. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I wanted to disappear a little. Maybe I didn't want to feel visible. My phone buzzed. "You don't like the light on this late." I slid off the bed and crouched on the floor, my back against the wall. I listened hard, straining to hear anything beyond my own breathing. The house was silent. Too silent. I dialed emergency services, but didn't press call yet. I held the phone in my hand, my finger hovering, unsure of what I would say if I did. Outside, I heard a sound near the front of the house. Not loud, just a faint shift, like someone adjusting their weight. I froze, barely breathing. My phone buzzed again. "I'm not inside." That sentence stayed with me. It didn't make me feel better. It made everything feel worse. I pressed call and whispered my address to the operator when she answered, telling her someone was messaging me and might be outside my house. She asked if I could see anyone. I said no. She told me officers were on the way and to stay where I was. While I was on the call, the sound came again. A soft knock. Just one. Gentle. Almost polite. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears filling them, whispering everything to the operator. The knock didn't repeat. The footsteps moved away slowly, unhurried. My phone buzzed one last time. I told you, you don't always remember. I stayed on the floor until I heard sirens in the distance. I didn't move when the officers knocked. I waited until they called out my name. Later, when everything was quiet again, one thought kept replaying in my mind. Not that someone had come to my house, but that I'd given them a reason by breaking a habit I didn't realize mattered. And I still don't know if forgetting to check the door was the mistake, or if it was the moment someone else noticed that I had. I stayed on the floor long after the call ended, my back against the wall, phone still pressed to my ear even though the operator had already told me the officers were close. I was afraid that if I moved, if I stood up too fast or made the wrong sound, something would happen before help arrived. The house felt different now, like it had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Every familiar shape seemed unfamiliar in the dark. When the police finally knocked, it startled me so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't answer right away. I waited until I heard one of them say my name, slow and clear, before I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The lights were still off. I hadn't turned them back on. I didn't want to see the house too clearly yet. They checked everything. The front door, the windows, the yard. Nothing was broken. Nothing forced. One of the officers asked if I was sure the door had been locked. I told him I thought so. I hated how uncertain that sounded out loud. He nodded, like uncertainty was something he heard often. They didn't find anyone. No footprints, no damaged latch, no sign that someone had actually touched the house. They asked about the messages. I showed them my phone. One of them took notes, while the other looked at the screen longer than I expected. He didn't say much, just asked if I recognized the number. I didn't. Before they left, one of them told me something that stuck with me. He said that sometimes people pay attention to patterns, and when those patterns change, it's noticeable. He didn't explain further. He didn't have to. After they were gone, the house felt emptier than before. I turned every light on and sat on the couch, staring at the front door. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound made my heart jump. I checked the lock over and over again, even though I knew it wouldn't change anything about what had already happened. The next morning, everything looked normal again. The sun came up, cars passed, neighbors went about their routines. In daylight, the house looked harmless. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined parts of it. Almost. I took the day off work and stayed home, afraid to leave the house empty, but just as afraid to be inside it. I walked from room to room, replaying the night in my head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment things shifted. It always came back to the same thing. The door. Or rather, the moment I didn't check it. That night, I stayed home again. I didn't want to, but I didn't want to feel like I was running either. I turned the lights on before it got dark and left them on. I checked the door twice. 3 times. I told myself I wouldn't let fear rewrite my life in one night. Around 10, I started to relax. Nothing happened. No sounds, no messages. I remember thinking that maybe the worst part had been the anticipation, and that now that the police had been involved, whoever it was would move on. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. You remembered this time. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. I typed back that they needed to stop contacting me. I just noticed. The reply came. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the bed, phone in my hand, breathing slowly. I told myself not to react. That reacting was what they wanted. Minutes passed. Then another message appeared. You feel safer when you check. I didn't respond. I sat there, listening. The house stayed quiet. No knocks, no footsteps. I almost started to believe it was just words on a screen again. Then I heard movement outside. Not loud, just enough to notice. A faint sound near the front of the house, like someone shifting their weight on the porch. My phone buzzed. I told you I wasn't inside. I called emergency services again, my voice steadier this time, explaining that the messages had resumed, and I thought someone might be outside. The operator told me officers were on the way and to stay where I was. The sound outside didn't get closer. It didn't move away either. It just stayed there, hovering at the edge of my awareness. I imagined someone standing on the porch, not touching anything, just listening, waiting. Red and blue lights eventually washed across the living room walls. The sound outside disappeared before the sirens fully arrived. When the police checked again, they found nothing. No one. No sign anyone had been there. That was the moment I realized something important. Whoever it was didn't need to come inside. They didn't need to knock again. They already knew enough. I didn't stay in that house much longer. Within a month, I moved. New place. Smaller. Closer to other people. I changed my number. I changed my routine. I became careful in ways I hadn't been before. Nothing like that ever happened again. But even now, years later, I still check the door. Every night. Sometimes more than once. Not because I think someone is there, but because I learned how visible small habits can be. How quickly someone can notice when you stop doing something you've always done. I don't know who was messaging me. I don't know how much of that night was coincidence and how much was intention. What I do know is that the night I stopped checking the door was the night someone else realized I was alone. And that knowledge has never really left me. I didn't realize how late it was until the house made me notice. Not with a loud noise or anything dramatic, just a shift in how the quiet felt. I was 41 then, living alone in a modest house, a little farther from town than I'd ever lived before. It wasn't remote, but it wasn't busy either. After midnight, the neighborhood went still in a way that felt different from earlier in the evening, like everyone else had collectively agreed to stop existing for a while. That night, I'd stayed up later than usual. I'd been sorting paperwork at the dining table, the kind of boring, unfinished life maintenance that never seems urgent until it's overdue. I had a lamp on beside me and nothing else. I liked keeping the rest of the house dark. It made the space feel smaller and easier to control. The TV was off. My phone sat face down on the table. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt to finally be alone with no one expecting anything from me. A little after 12, I got up to make tea. As I walked through the kitchen, I caught myself slowing down, listening. The house sounded different, not louder, just more noticeable. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the clock on the wall. I told myself I was just tired and finished making the tea. On my way back to the dining table, I noticed the back door. The curtain covering the window was shifted slightly, just enough that a thin line of darkness showed through. I stopped and stared at it for a moment, trying to remember if I'd left it like that. I usually closed it all the way at night, usually. I told myself I must have bumped it earlier and reached out to pull it straight. That was when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I frowned and picked it up, annoyed more than anything. When I opened the message, my stomach tightened. "You're still awake." I stared at the screen, rereading the words. I hadn't told anyone I was up. I typed back, asking who it was, then hesitated and erased it. I didn't send anything. I set the phone down and told myself not to engage with whatever this was. The phone buzzed again. "You make tea when you're tired." My chest felt tight. I looked at the mug in my hand, steam still rising. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't said anything out loud. I picked the phone back up and typed that they had the wrong number. "No." The reply came. "I don't." I set the phone down again, my heart starting to beat faster. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A neighbor guessing. Someone messing with me. A coincidence that felt worse than it was. I walked to the front door and checked the lock, even though I remembered locking it earlier. It was secure. I checked the back door too. Locked. The curtain was still slightly open, and I pulled it closed all the way. My phone buzzed. "You didn't need to do that." I froze. I stood there in the kitchen, phone in my hand, listening hard. The house was silent. Too silent. I didn't hear anyone outside. I didn't hear footsteps or voices or movement of any kind. Another message appeared. "I can tell when you move." My hands started shaking. I went into the bedroom and closed the door quietly, locking it behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to slow my breathing. I typed that they needed to stop contacting me. "I don't want to scare you," the reply said. That didn't help. It made everything worse. I turned the bedroom light off, leaving only the faint glow from the hallway creeping in under the door. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I wanted to feel less visible. Maybe I didn't want whoever this was to imagine me clearly. My phone buzzed again. "You like the house dark." I whispered no to myself, even though no one could hear me. I dialed emergency services, but didn't press call yet. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, unsure of what I would say if I did. All I had were messages. No proof, no face, no voice. Outside, I heard something near the back of the house. Not loud, just a faint sound, like someone shifting their weight on the ground. I froze, barely breathing. The phone buzzed. "I'm not inside." That sentence stayed with me. It didn't comfort me. It felt like a correction, like they were clarifying a detail I hadn't asked about. I pressed call and whispered my address to the operator when she answered, telling her someone was messaging me and I thought they might be outside. She asked if I could see anyone. I said no. She asked if I heard anything. I said I wasn't sure. While I was on the call, the sound came again. Soft footsteps, slow and careful, moving along the back of the house. They stopped beneath the window. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears filling them, whispering everything to the operator. She told me officers were on the way and to stay where I was. The footsteps didn't come closer. They didn't move away either. They just lingered, like whoever it was deciding something. My phone buzzed one more time. You shouldn't be up this late alone. I stayed on the bed, shaking, until I heard sirens in the distance. The footsteps retreated quickly after that, moving away from the house, disappearing into the quiet. When the police arrived, they searched the yard and the area behind the house. They didn't find anyone. One of the officers asked if I recognized the number. I didn't. Another told me it was good that I'd called when I did. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the bedroom with the lights on, replaying the messages over and over. What stayed with me wasn't just the fear. It was the realization that someone had noticed how late I stayed awake, and that being alone at night had made that detail matter. I stayed on the bed long after the operator told me officers were close, my phone pressed to my ear even though there was nothing left to say. I was afraid to move, afraid that the smallest sound would somehow matter. The house felt like it was listening now, every creak and shift suddenly too noticeable. When the sirens finally came into earshot, I felt my shoulders drop for the first time since the messages started. The police knocked a few minutes later. I didn't answer right away. I waited until I heard one of them say my name, steady and calm, before I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. I turned the lights on as I went, needing the house to look ordinary again. They checked the doors, the windows, the yard behind the house. Nothing was broken, nothing forced. One of them asked about the messages, and I handed over my phone. He scrolled silently, his expression neutral, then asked if I recognized the number. I didn't. He nodded, like that answer wasn't surprising. They didn't find anyone. Before they left, one of the officers said something that stuck with me. He said sometimes people notice patterns, especially when those patterns are quiet and predictable. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. After they were gone, the house felt hollow, like something had been taken out of it. I turned every light on and sat at the dining table until morning, staring at the back door and the curtain I'd straightened too late. In daylight, everything looked harmless again. The yard was empty. The land behind the house stretched out the same way it always had, calm and unremarkable. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined parts of the night. Almost. I took the day off work and stayed home, too tired to think clearly and too uneasy to leave. I walked the perimeter slowly, checking the back fence, the door frames, the windows. Near the back of the house, I noticed faint scuffs in the dirt beneath one window. They weren't obvious, just enough to suggest someone had stood there for a moment. I didn't know when they'd appeared. I didn't know how long they'd been there. That evening, I tried to do everything differently. I closed all the curtains before it got dark. I left more lights on than usual. I kept the TV playing softly in the background, not for entertainment, but to break the silence. I checked the locks twice, 3 times. I told myself that once the police had been involved, whoever it was would move on. Around 11, I started to relax. Nothing happened, no messages, no sounds. I remember thinking that maybe the fear had been the worst part, and that now it was over. I stood up to take my mug to the sink when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You stayed home today. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, my hands suddenly cold. I typed back that they needed to stop contacting me. The reply came slower than before, as if it had been considered. I wanted to see if you would. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the bed, phone in my hand, trying to keep my breathing steady. I told myself not to respond, that reacting would only make it worse. Another message appeared. You closed the curtains earlier. That was when it sank in that this wasn't guessing. They were watching. Not constantly maybe, but often enough to notice changes. I called emergency services again, my voice steadier than I felt, and told the operator the messages had resumed from a different number and that I thought someone might be outside again. She told me officers were on the way and to stay inside. Outside, I heard movement near the back of the house. Soft, careful. My phone buzzed. I'm not trying to scare you. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from crying. The movement outside continued, slow footsteps circling the house the way they had the night before. They stopped near the back door. I heard the handle tested gently, like someone checking without wanting to make noise. "You always lock it," the next message said. I whispered everything to the operator, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. She kept me talking, telling me help was close. The footsteps moved away from the door, pausing beneath a window, then continuing on. The house felt unbearably small. Then sirens cut through the quiet. Outside, the footsteps sped up, no longer careful. I heard movement retreating into the dark behind the house. By the time the police arrived, the yard was empty again. They found disturbed dirt near the back window and fresh footprints leading away toward the open lands, but no one was there. One of the officers looked at me and said it seemed like someone had been testing my reactions, learning what I did when I was alone late at night. That sentence stayed with me long after they left. I didn't stay in the house much longer. I packed a bag that night and stayed with a friend. Over the next week, I changed my phone number, adjusted my routine, and started coming home at different times. I installed cameras. I stopped staying up so late with the house dark and quiet. For a while, nothing happened. The fear dulled into something manageable. I told myself it was over. Then, about a month later, I received a single message from an unknown number. "You sleep earlier now." I blocked the number immediately. Nothing else followed. I moved not long after. New place, closer neighbors, less open space behind the house. Even now, I still notice how late it is when the quiet settles in. I still pay attention to small changes in the dark, because the most unsettling part wasn't the messages or the footsteps. It was realizing how much someone could learn just by watching when you thought you were alone. I didn't think the street looked strange when I first noticed the car. That was the unsettling part. It blended in too easily, parked where cars sometimes parked, dark enough to disappear into the quiet. I was 37 then, living alone in a small house on a narrow residential street. Nothing fancy, nothing isolated, just far enough from the main road that things slowed down at night. I'd lived there long enough to recognize the usual patterns, even if I never consciously thought about them. That night, I got home just after 10. I remember checking the time because I'd meant to be home earlier and lost track of it. I locked the door, set my bag down, and turned on the lamp in the living room. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I rarely did that late at night. It made the house feel too exposed. I heated something small to eat and stood at the counter, listening to the quiet. When I glanced out the front window, I noticed the car across the street. It was parked along the curb, facing away from my house. The lights were off. The engine wasn't running. At first, I assumed it belonged to a neighbor or someone visiting nearby. I didn't look at it for long. I went back to my food and my phone. A few minutes later, I looked again. The car hadn't moved. That still didn't mean anything. People parked overnight sometimes. Still, something about it made me pause. I tried to remember if it had been there when I pulled in. I couldn't be sure. I told myself that was normal too. You don't remember every detail of a street you see every day. I turned off the kitchen light and went to the living room, leaving only the lamp on. I sat on the couch and scrolled through my phone, half watching the dark window in front of me. After a while, I realized I was checking it more often than I needed to. That was when I decided to stop looking. I reached over and turned the lamp off. The house went dark, except for the faint glow from my phone screen. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to feel less visible. Maybe I wanted to convince myself the car didn't matter. I leaned back against the couch and focused on the screen in my hands. That was when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I frowned and opened the message, expecting spam or a wrong number. Instead, there was only one sentence. "You turned the light off." My stomach tightened. I stared at the words longer than I should have. I told myself it had to be coincidence. Someone guessing. Someone sending random messages to strangers. I typed back, asking who it was. The reply came almost immediately. "I didn't want to distract you." I felt a chill move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I locked my phone and sat there in the dark, listening. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear voices. Nothing outside sounded different than it had before. My phone buzzed again. "You don't like being watched." I stood up quickly, my heart starting to race. I walked to the front door and checked the lock, even though I remembered locking it when I came in. It was secure. I checked the deadbolts. Still locked. I glanced at the window but didn't step closer. I didn't want to confirm what I was afraid of seeing. Another message appeared. "You noticed the car." I sat back down slowly, my phone heavy in my hand. I typed that they had the wrong person, that they needed to stop messaging me. The reply came after a short pause. "No, I'm just waiting." That word stayed with me. Waiting. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a statement, like something that had already been decided. I moved down the hallway and locked my bedroom door, something I'd never done before. I sat on the bed, phone clutched in both hands, trying to slow my breathing. I told myself not to panic, that there was no proof anyone was outside, that messages were just messages. Outside, I heard a sound, not loud, just the faint click of a car door closing. My phone buzzed. "I told you I wouldn't leave yet." I slid off the bed and crouched on the floor, my back against the wall. I dialed emergency services, but hesitated before pressing call. I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding ridiculous. I had no name, no face, just words on a screen and a car I might be imagining. The phone buzzed again. "You don't need to call anyone." That was when I pressed call. I whispered my address to the operator when she answered, telling her someone was messaging me and I thought they were outside my house. She asked if I could see them. I said I didn't want to look. She told me officers were on the way and to stay inside. While I was on the call, I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, moving across the street. I listened as they stopped somewhere in front of my house. I held my breath, barely daring to move. My phone buzzed again. "I'm not coming closer." I squeezed my eyes shut, tears filling them, whispering everything to the operator. She kept me talking, grounding me, telling me help was close. The footsteps didn't move. Whoever it was stayed there, not knocking, not testing the door, just standing in the dark. I don't know how long it was before I heard sirens. At first they were distant, then closer. Outside, the footsteps finally moved, quick and careless now. I heard a car engine start and pull away. By the time the police arrived, the street was empty. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. One of the officers asked if I recognized the number. I didn't. Another told me it was good that I hadn't gone outside. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed with every light on, replaying the messages in my head. What stayed with me wasn't just the fear. It was the realization that someone had noticed when I stopped looking outside, and that choosing not to look had somehow told them exactly where I was. I stayed awake until morning with every light on, sitting on the edge of the bed and listening to the house like it might suddenly explain itself. The officers had left after checking the street and nearby blocks, telling me to call again if anything else happened. They didn't say much, but one of them paused at the door and told me I did the right thing by staying inside. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. When daylight finally came, the street looked ordinary again. The curb where the car had been was empty. No marks, no signs that anyone had stood there for as long as it felt like they had. In the morning light, everything from the night before felt distant and unreal, like it belonged to someone else. I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Almost. I took the day off work and didn't leave the house. I kept replaying the messages in my head, trying to understand what they meant and what they didn't. I walked through the room slowly, noticing how many windows faced the street and how little attention I'd paid to that before. I checked the locks again and again. Not because I thought they'd changed, but because I needed something to do with my hands. That evening, I tried to be practical. I closed the blinds before it got dark. I parked my car farther down the street instead of directly in front of the house. I left multiple lights on and kept the TV playing quietly in the background. I told myself that if whoever it was came back, they wouldn't see the same patterns as the night before. For a while, it worked. Nothing happened. No messages. No car. By 10:30, I felt my shoulders relax for the first time since the night before. I remember thinking that maybe the fear had been the worst part, and that now it was done. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You changed a few things." My chest tightened instantly. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. I typed back, telling them to stop contacting me. The reply didn't come right away this time. When it did, it felt measured. I noticed. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the bed, phone in my hand, breathing slowly. I told myself not to react. That reacting was what they wanted. Minutes passed. Another message appeared. "You parked farther away." That was when it hit me how carefully they'd been paying attention, not just to the house, but to the choices I made. The small ones I thought didn't matter. I called emergency services again, my voice steadier than I felt, and told the operator the same person was messaging me and seemed to know my routine. She told me officers were on the way and to stay inside. Outside, I heard a car pull up. My heart started racing. I moved carefully to the bedroom window and peeked through the curtain just enough to see. A dark car was parked down the street, farther than before but close enough to notice. Headlights off, engine running quietly. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to be obvious. I backed away from the window and sat on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest. The operator stayed on the line, asking what I could hear. The engine shut off. A door opened, then closed softly. Footsteps moved along the sidewalk, slow and deliberate. Another message appeared. "You don't look anymore." That sentence scared me more than anything else. It meant they'd noticed the moment I stopped checking the window, that choosing not to look had become part of the pattern they were watching. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from crying and whispered everything to the operator. The footsteps stopped somewhere near the front of the house, not close enough to touch the door, not far enough to feel safe. Whoever it was stayed there, just out of sight, like they were deciding something. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Red and blue lights suddenly reflected off the walls inside the room. Sirens cut through the quiet. Outside, the footsteps moved quickly now, no longer careful. I heard the car door slam and the engine roar to life as it sped away. When the police arrived, they searched the area again. They found fresh tire marks farther down the street and footprints leading back toward the sidewalk, but no one was there. One officer told me quietly that it seemed like someone was watching my habits and adjusting their distance accordingly. That sentence stayed with me. I didn't stay in that house much longer. Within a week, I moved in with a friend. A month later, I found a new place, different neighborhood, more lighting, more people around. I changed my number and didn't give it out easily. For a long time, nothing happened. The fear faded into something manageable. I started sleeping again. I told myself it was finally over. Then, months later, I got a single message from an unknown number. "You stopped checking." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Before I could think too much about it, I blocked the number. Nothing else followed. Even now, I still think about that first night, about the moment I decided not to look out the window again. What stays with me isn't just the fear of being watched. It's the realization that someone noticed when I chose not to look back.